The heat of the jungle pressed against the walls of the human outpost like a living thing. The air was thick and heavy. Every breath tasted of damp leaves and iron. Far beyond the perimeter, the calls of unseen creatures echoed through the towering green, yet none of them matched the sound that came now. A deep rumble that made the ground tremble and the hearts of the sentries tighten in their chests. From the shadow of the trees it came, the alpha predator, a beast that every hunter feared, a shape of muscle and scars, its hide dark and patterned with stripes that seemed to shift in the light. Its eyes burned with an ancient fire. It was a thing spoken of in hushed voices by alien traders, a creature that ruled its world without question. Yet today it came alone, and in its great jaws it carried something small. Two tiny shapes dangled from the alpha's mouth, fur as soft as mist, tails curled tight. They were its cubs. No one in the outpost moved. No one dared raise a weapon. The alpha stepped forward until it stood inside the open gate, its paws silent on the dirt, its breath slow and steady. Then, with a single motion, it placed the cubs on the ground before the humans and raised its head to look at them. The moment stretched, the sound of the jungle faded. All that remained was the gaze of the alpha. There was no plea in its eyes, only command. It had chosen them, not as prey but as guardians. Why it did so no one could guess. The humans had never shared trust with its kind, never even stood this close, without death waiting in the air. Yet here the cubs lay, mewling softly, blind to the danger around them. Commander Harlan stepped forward, his boots slow on the earth. Every soldier watched in silence. His hand hovered near the hilt of his sidearm, though he did not draw it. His voice was low as he spoke into his calm, ordering the gates to remain shut. The alpha's tail flicked once, the meaning unclear. Then it turned its head toward the jungle, as if daring anyone to follow it back into the wild. Harlan knelt beside the cubs. They smelled of rain and blood. Their small claws flexed against his gloves. They were warm, fragile, yet when he lifted one it made a noise unlike anything he had heard, a noise that felt almost like words. The second cub pushed against his arm as if to climb higher. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. No one wanted to be near them, yet no one could look away. The alpha did not leave at once. It stood there, watching, its breath rising in slow clouds in the humid air. Then, after a long moment, it stepped back toward the gate, not rushing, not hiding, and disappeared into the curtain of vines. Its eyes lingered for one last instant, glowing like twin suns in the shadow, and then they were gone. Only then did the jungle noise return, yet it felt different, more alive, more watchful. Harlan ordered the cubs taken to the medical wing. Their presence seemed to fill the air with tension, as if every living thing beyond the walls now had reason to come closer. In the distance a flock of bright red birds took to the air all at once, startled by something unseen. Hours later, word spread, not only through the colony but across nearby systems. Messages raced along trade channels and military frequencies. The news was simple yet impossible. An alpha predator had walked into a human settlement and delivered its young alive. Every species that heard it reacted the same way, disbelief mixed with a hunger to know more. The alpha had never done this for anyone, not even its own kind. By evening, the first alien craft had landed outside the perimeter, their crews claiming to be researchers, healers, diplomats, each asking the same question. Where are the cubs? Can we see them? Can we study them? Some smiled too much. Others watched the soldiers with eyes that calculated risk and reward. The colony gates remained closed, yet the feeling of being surrounded grew heavier with each hour. Inside the medical wing, the cubs explored their enclosure, already stronger than expected. They batted at tools, climbed small barriers, and chirped when a human approached. The youngest medic swore she saw one mimic her movement when she raised a hand. Harlan stood in the observation room above, arms folded, his mind turning over the same thought. Why us? Why now? As night fell, the stars burned bright over the jungle canopy, but the air inside the outpost felt close, suffocating. The comms officer reported an unusual transmission intercepted from a deep space relay. It was not addressed to the colony, yet it mentioned them by name. The voice was alien, sharp and cold, speaking in a language the translators struggled to smooth. The words it carried were few but heavy. If the Alpha trusts the humans, the galaxy will watch, and the galaxy will see them fail. The night had barely passed before the story of the Alpha's gift traveled far beyond the jungle world, out past the silent moons and through the great black corridors of space. It moved along trader routes like fire racing over dry grass, across encrypted military channels, and through the hidden talk of mercenaries. In orbital stations and council halls the same words were spoken. The Alpha Predator has given its cubs to humans, and every time those words were repeated the disbelief in the voice was matched only by curiosity, and under that curiosity a deep hunger grew. From the wide glass of the command tower, Commander Harlan watched the horizon shift from pale blue to gold as the sun climbed over the dense canopy. He could feel in his bones that their quiet outpost had become the center of something vast, something that would not stop at the colony gates. In the courtyard below, the soldiers trained in tight formations, their eyes often sliding toward the medical wing where the cubs were kept, and though none spoke of it aloud, each one knew they were now guarding a prize every ambitious hand would want to seize. Messages arrived with increasing frequency. The first came from allied worlds offering aid, then from unknown stations claiming neutrality, then from powers with reputations soaked in blood. Each message different in voice, but the same in request: to see the cubs, to study them, to speak of them face to face. Harlan turned them all away. Yet the ships still came, hanging in orbit like patient vultures, their crews sending encrypted whispers to anyone in the colony willing to listen. In the med bay, the cubs were restless, climbing over one another in play, their small claws scratching the smooth floor, their fur catching the light in silver streaks. The human medics worked in pairs, monitoring the cubs' health. But the young creatures seemed impossibly strong for their size. They ate twice the ration expected. Their eyes held a strange clarity, sometimes turning toward voices in the hallway as if they understood. And once, when a medic hummed a short tune while cleaning a datapad, one cub tilted its head and hummed back in almost the same rhythm. By midday, alien envoys began to arrive in person. The first to step through the gates were tall and thin, their skin marked with blue lines like veins of stone. They bowed politely and spoke of peace, offering fruit from their homeworld and ornate blankets for the cubs. Harlan accepted the gifts, but refused access. The envoy smiled, yet the smile did not reach its eyes. More ships followed, more envoys came, each with gifts and questions, each leaving with glances that hinted at thoughts not spoken. In the market quarter, rumors spread faster than goods could be sold. Traders whispered that the cubs carried a secret, perhaps a key to controlling all predator clans. Others claimed the Alpha's gift was a trap, meant to lure humans into a war they could not win. Some said the Alpha was dying, and the humans had been chosen to raise heirs who would inherit its dominion. In every corner of the colony the whispers grew thicker, until even the soldiers could not help but wonder which version of the story was true. Late in the afternoon, a human soldier named Vale moved through the crowded alleys, scanning the faces for trouble. A shadow stepped beside him, a figure cloaked in a fabric that shimmered between colors. The voice that spoke was low and sharp. Your commander believes the Alpha gave you a gift, but gifts from such a beast are never without cost. The cubs are not symbols of trust. They are seeds of war. Vale turned to question the stranger, but the figure had already melted into the crowd, leaving only the echo of the warning in the humid air. That night, the colony slept under a false calm. The perimeter lights burned bright against the jungle's black edge. Sentries stood watch in pairs, rifles ready. Inside the medbay the cubs lay curled in the corner of their pen, their chests rising and falling in soft rhythm. The medic on duty scribbled notes on their growth rate, glancing up every so often to be sure they were safe. Nothing in the monitor suggested any threat, yet a faint prickle along the medic's neck told another story. The jungle was quiet, too quiet. The usual chorus of creatures had faded, replaced by a stillness that seemed to press in from all sides. In the shadows outside the walls, shapes moved low to the ground, slipping between trees, their movements deliberate, their eyes glinting like shards of ice in the glow of the perimeter lamps. On the roof of the med bay a dark form crouched, its breath slow, its hands gripping the edge of a vent cover. In the command tower, the comms officer picked up a faint transmission on an unregistered frequency. It was a series of clicks and low tones, almost like the sound of rain on metal. The translator struggled to make sense of it. The partial message that came through was enough to twist the stomach. 2 units acquired. Extraction in progress. No alarms yet. Harlan moved fast, his boots pounding against the steel floor, as he ordered all gates sealed and the medbay reinforced. Soldiers scrambled through corridors, their armor clashing in the rush. Alarms began to wail, but the sound came too late. Inside the medbay, the medic turned toward the Cub's enclosure, just in time to see an empty floor where they had been moments ago. No broken bars, no cut locks, only a faint warmth left in the space where their bodies had rested. The outpost was thrown into chaos. Search teams flooded into the jungle, lights sweeping through thick fog, voices shouting over comms. The scent of rain and crushed leaves filled the air. Tracking drones scanned for heat signatures, catching glimpses of fast-moving shapes that vanished as soon as they appeared. Above, distant flashes marked ships breaking through the upper atmosphere, their trails like claws, slashing the night sky. In the deep forest, Vale pushed through vines and tangled roots, his rifle scanning for movement. The comm in his ear crackled with reports, most of them conflicting. Sightings in 3 different directions, signals cut off mid-sentence. The air seemed to vibrate with the tension of a hunt. Somewhere far ahead, a high-pitched cry rang out, thin but sharp enough to slice through the thick jungle noise. Vale froze, recognizing the sound. It was one of the Cubs. He broke into a run, leaping over roots and sliding down a slope into a narrow ravine. At the bottom lay his fellow scout, armor dented, visor cracked. The scout's hand clutched a comm unit that hissed with static. His eyes were wide, breath ragged. I found them. The words were barely more than a whisper, but his gaze darted to the dark trees beyond, where 2 small shapes flickered in the beam of Vale's light. Before Vale could move, the sound of movement filled the air, not just from ahead but from both sides. Heavy steps and soft scraping, like many hands and claws dragging over stone. Shadows shifted against the trunks, shapes moving with the predator's patience. The Cubs stayed frozen, their small bodies tense, their eyes fixed not on Vale, but on something deeper in the dark. Vale raised his rifle, his voice low into the comm. "Commander, I have eyes on the Cubs, but I am not alone out here." The words were barely sent before the comm burst into static, and the beam of his light caught a face. Alien, sharp, and too close. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as the first drop of rain fell from the canopy above. The jungle had always been dangerous for humans, but tonight it felt alive in a way that was different. It breathed around them. It listened. It stalked. And every sound seemed sharper. Every shadow seemed deeper. The loss of the Cubs had spread through the outpost like fire, and now the soldiers moved through the gates in fast groups, their weapons ready and their eyes locked on the black curtain of trees ahead. Commander Harlan gave the order himself. "No one returns without the Cubs. No one. Lets them vanish into the dark." The ground was slick from a fresh rain that had fallen without warning. Boots sank into mud that clung to every step. The air was thick and heavy with the smell of wet leaves and distant storms. In the branches above something moved, quick and quiet, but no one could see what it was. The search team split into 3 lines, fanning out through the undergrowth. Small drones flew ahead, casting pale light over twisted roots and low mist. Every few seconds a soldier's voice cracked over the comm. With a brief report, movement detected, tracks found, heat signature fading, but no sight of the Cubs themselves. In the lead team, Vale pushed forward, his hands tight around his rifle, his ears tuned for the smallest noise. He could still hear the thin cry of the Cub he had followed earlier. It had been close, too close, and yet the shapes in the dark had moved between him and his goal like a wall. His mind replayed the brief glimpse he had caught of that alien face, its eyes cold and unreadable, its skin marked with strange lines that pulsed faintly in the dark. It had not attacked, it had only stood there, blocking his way, before melting back into the trees. The comms filled with overlapping voices as the other teams reported strange findings. A broken branch as thick as a human arm, footprints that were not human or alpha predator, scorch marks in the dirt as if from an engine thruster. Harlan's voice cut through the noise, ordering them to keep moving. The scent of smoke drifted on the damp air, faint but clear. Someone had lit a fire deep in the jungle, a fire big enough to send a signal or to keep dangerous creatures away. Vale turned toward it, his team following without question. As they drew closer to the smoke, the sounds of the jungle began to fade, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from the ground itself. The soil trembled under their boots. Somewhere nearby, something heavy was moving in rhythm, not walking but rotating. A machine, perhaps. Vale signaled for silence. They crouched low and moved through the last stretch of thick leaves until the trees opened into a clearing. In the center of that clearing stood a ship, small enough to land in the jungle but armed with turrets that tracked the slightest movement. Its hull was painted in the black and silver colors of the Syndicate, a criminal fleet known across the galaxy for taking what they wanted and leaving nothing behind. Near the open ramp of the ship, a group of armed figures stood guard, their weapons long and curved like bone, their armor patched together from many battles. Between them a small cage rested on the ground. Inside the cage the cubs huddled together, their eyes wide, their ears twitching at every sound. Vale's chest tightened at the sight. They were alive, but frightened. The guard closest to the cage reached down and prodded them with the barrel of his weapon, as if testing their reactions. One of the cubs snapped at it with a small growl that was almost brave. The guard laughed. Vale counted 6 guards in the open and more likely hidden in the shadows of the ship. A frontal attack would be suicide, but waiting too long risked the ship lifting off. The hum beneath the ground grew louder, the engines warming. He tapped his comm once and whispered coordinates to Harlan. The reply was quick. Hold position. Reinforcements coming. Vale gritted his teeth. Every second felt like a chain tightening around the cubs' necks. Suddenly a branch snapped behind him. He spun, rifle raised. But instead of an enemy, he saw a shape crouched low, eyes glowing faintly. It was the same alien from before, its movement smooth and silent. It raised a hand slowly, not in threat but in signal, then pointed toward the ship and then to the ground beneath their feet. Vale's mind raced. Was it warning him? Was it a trap? The alien leaned closer and in a voice that was like gravel whispered, "Tunnel beneath. Leads to cage. Move now or lose them forever." Then it slipped away into the dark without waiting for an answer. Vale made the decision in an instant. He gestured for his team to follow and moved around the clearing until they found a narrow crack in the earth hidden under fallen leaves. The hum of the engines was stronger here, a faint vibration running through the ground. They dropped into the opening one by one, sliding down into a cramped tunnel barely wide enough to crawl through. The air was stale, lit only by the faint glow of moss on the walls. The sound of the guards above was muffled but still present. The tunnel curved upward until it ended in a small grate set into the floor of the clearing. Vale pressed his eye to it and saw the cage just a few meters away. 2 guards stood near it, talking in low voices, their backs turned. Vale signaled to his team. They pushed at the grate until it gave way with a soft crack. The guards turned at the noise, but too late. The humans surged up from the ground, tackling them to the dirt in a silent struggle. Vale reached for the cage, his hands closing around the latch. But before he could open it, a shout rang out from the ramp of the ship. More guards spilling down the steps, weapons raised. Blaster fire lit the clearing in sharp bursts of blue light. The humans dove for cover, returning fire in quick bursts. Vale kept himself between the cage and the incoming shots. One bolt struck the ground so close the heat burned his leg through the armor. The cubs shrank back, but did not cry out. Harlan's voice came over the comm again. Reinforcements inbound. Hold that position. But Vale could see the ship's engines glowing brighter, the hum rising into a roar. They were out of time. A shadow passed overhead, massive and silent, and for a moment every fighter in the clearing froze. From the jungle's edge a shape emerged, towering and terrible, the alpha predator itself, its eyes burning like molten gold. It stepped into the clearing without fear. The guards turned their weapons toward it, but it moved with a speed that defied its size, striking one down with a sweep of its claw. The others broke ranks, some firing wildly, others fleeing into the trees. The alpha did not look at Vale. It did not look at the humans at all. It moved straight to the cage, and with one swipe tore it open. The cubs tumbled out, pressing themselves against its massive forelegs. It bent low, rumbling deep in its chest, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to narrow to only that sound. Then it turned and walked toward the jungle, the cubs close against its body, ignoring the humans completely. Vale stepped forward, reaching out, but the alpha paused just at the edge of the clearing. its head turning slightly as if to test whether the humans would follow. Then, without warning, it vanished into the shadows, the cubs vanishing with it. The clearing fell silent except for the dying hum of the syndicate ship and the labored breathing of the soldiers. Somewhere far away a new sound began to rise, the beating of many feet moving in unison. Something else was coming, and it was coming fast. The sound came first, low and deep like the rolling of distant thunder. But it was not thunder. It was a rhythm, the heavy pounding of many feet moving through the jungle in unison. The soldiers froze where they stood in the clearing, their weapons lifting toward the black wall of trees. Vale's pulse beat hard in his ears. The Alpha and its cubs had already melted into the shadows, leaving only the scent of earth and blood in their wake. And now the air itself seemed to shiver under the weight of something new approaching. Commander Harlan's voice came through the calm, clipped and urgent. All teams pull back to defensive positions. Do not engage unless forced. But the pounding was growing louder, closer, like a storm of bodies crashing toward them. The jungle mist swirled in strange currents as if pushed ahead of whatever was coming. Shapes began to appear between the trunks. First just flickers of movement, then the glint of wet eyes and the pale curve of fangs catching the dim light. The first of them broke from the tree line without a sound, long and lean with muscles coiled under dark hides, their movements low to the ground but swift, their jaws bristling with rows of needle teeth. More followed, a wave of creatures flowing into the clearing with unnatural grace. Vale recognized them from off-world briefings. Night Fangs, pack hunters bred for war by the Syndicate, silent killers that struck in perfect coordination, and there were far too many to count. The soldiers opened fire, the clearing erupting in flashes of blue and white light, the bolts tearing through some of the beasts. But for everyone that fell, two more darted forward, weaving through the gunfire with terrifying speed. One leapt at Vale from the side, its claws scraping across his shoulder plate as he twisted away and slammed the butt of his rifle into its jaw. Another came from behind, only to be cut down by a burst from the soldier at his back. Harlan's voice was shouting over the comm, fall back, regroup at the southern ridge. But the Night Fangs were driving them toward the jungle instead, cutting off escape routes with quick strikes. The air was filled with the hiss of claws on armor and the sharp cries of wounded men. Vale's boots slipped in the wet mud as he tried to push through toward the ridge, his mind fixed on breaking free before the pack could close in completely. Then from the far side of the clearing a new sound split the chaos, a sharp whistle that carried over the gunfire. The Night Fangs froze for the briefest moment, their heads turning toward the source, and through the smoke and shifting mist a figure stepped into view, tall and wrapped in armor of bone and metal, its head crowned with a crest of spines. In one hand it held a long spear that crackled faintly with blue energy, in the other a chain that led to a smaller Night Fang, this one collared and docile at its side. The pack shifted at once, their aggression fading into stillness. The figure strode forward, the ground seeming to bow under its steps. It moved through the soldiers as if they were nothing more than shadows, its eyes fixed on Vale. And when it stopped just a few paces away the air seemed to grow heavier, the Night Fangs forming a loose ring around them both, weapons lowered by instinct rather than order. Its voice was deep and harsh, speaking words that the translators struggled to smooth. You are far from ready human, yet you hold the trust of an Alpha. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying his face. Those cubs are more than blood to their parent. They are heirs to a throne of teeth and claw, and many in the galaxy would see them dead before they ever take that place. The figure took a slow step closer, its shadow falling over Vale. Your kind has been chosen for a test, not an honor. Vale's grip on his rifle tightened, but he held his ground. The figure's gaze shifted toward the trees, where the Alpha had vanished. Its voice dropped lower. There are others who will come for them, more skilled, more patient. If you cannot match them, you will lose the cubs, and your lives will follow. The Night Fang at its side growled softly as if agreeing. Then the figure stepped back and raised its spear high. The pack responded instantly, pulling away from the humans in a silent wave and slipping back into the jungle as swiftly as they had come. For a long moment only the sound of the departing pack remained. Then even that faded, leaving the soldiers standing in a battered clearing, armor torn, weapons low, the Syndicate ship still smoldering where it had been damaged in the earlier fight. Harlan's voice came again. Quieter now. All teams regroup at the southern ridge. We need to talk. Vale glanced once more toward the direction the figure had gone. The jungle there was still and empty, yet he could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes were still watching. The retreat to the ridge was slow, the soldiers moving in wary silence. Every rustle of leaves a reminder of how close the pack had come. Above them the clouds were breaking, shafts of pale moonlight cutting down through the trees. The ridge rose from the jungle like the spine of a sleeping giant, its slope covered in thick moss and twisted roots. From the top the view stretched far across the canopy, the distant glow of other fires marking points of activity deep within the wild. Harlan was waiting, his expression grim. He listened to each report in silence, his gaze turning toward Vale when the mention of the armored figure came. His jaw tightened. That is no ordinary mercenary. That is a blood rival of the Alpha's kind. They should not even be here on this world, which means they came for one reason only. He turned to the rest of the team. We are no longer just protecting two cubs. We are standing in the way of a war that could tear half this sector apart. A faint rumble passed under their boots. This time not the pounding of feet, but something mechanical. The ridge vibrated slightly. In the distance beyond the fires a faint streak of light cut across the night sky. Then another. Harlan's calm officer looked up sharply. Multiple ships entering atmosphere. Unregistered signatures. Likely more syndicate. Vale felt his stomach knot. They would not be coming in such numbers unless they already knew exactly what they wanted. In the far shadows at the edge of the ridge something shifted. Just enough for the moonlight to catch the gleam of an eye. Not human, not Alpha, but something else. It lingered only a second before melting away into the dark. Vale turned toward Harlan to speak, but the commander's hand came up in a sharp signal for silence. The jungle below was waking again, the rustle of branches and the quiet thud of movement spreading through the undergrowth. Whatever had been watching them was not alone. Harlan's voice was low but carried enough steel to reach every ear. Hold positions, weapons ready. We are not alone on this ridge, and whatever is coming, it is not here to talk. The soldiers shifted into a defensive line, their eyes scanning the black between the trees. The night air seemed to tighten around them. Somewhere below a single howl rose, long and cold, answered by another and then another until the sound wove itself into a chorus. The teeth in the dark were gathering once again, and this time they would not be called off. The night wind curled over the ridge, carrying with it smell of rain and the faint metallic tang of blood. The soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the black sea of jungle below. The howls had faded into silence, but the silence was worse. It felt heavy, waiting, like the breath before a strike. Vale kept his rifle steady, though every instinct told him they were being measured, weighed, judged by eyes they could not see. Without warning, a light flickered in the trees far below, a pale shimmer that pulsed once, twice, then vanished. A moment later the comm in Harlan's ear crackled with a strange static. The translator stuttered, and then a deep voice rolled through the channel. Not human, not friendly. Prove you deserve them. The words carried the weight of a command, not a request. Then the signal cut, leaving only the whisper of the wind. Harlan looked toward Vale. The meaning was clear. This was not just a hunt anymore. It was a trial. The Alpha was watching from somewhere out there, waiting to see if humans could guard what it had given them. Failure would mean not only the loss of the cubs, but the loss of whatever strange alliance had begun when the Alpha stepped through their gates. And in this galaxy, an alliance with such a creature was worth more than fleets of warships. The rumble of engines broke the quiet, low at first, then swelling as shadows passed overhead, sleek dark craft sweeping low over the canopy, syndicate colors flashing in the moonlight, their searchlights cut through the branches like knives, hunting for movement. The soldiers ducked low, but there was no hiding for long. The ships were closing in, circling the ridge, dropships lowering toward the jungle floor, their ramps opening to spill armored figures into the shadows. Harlan's orders were sharp. 2 squads to hold the ridge, 2 to move down and intercept. Vale's team was among those heading into the jungle. The air was thick with the smell of engine exhaust and damp leaves. Branches whipped against their armor as they moved at speed, following the faint tracks left by something heavy that had passed through recently. Maybe the Alpha, maybe the Cubs, or maybe the Syndicate already ahead of them. They broke into a small clearing lit by the pale light of the moon, At its center stood a crude camp, little more than a fire pit and a scattering of equipment. But near the flames hung a small cage, too small for the cubs, and inside it something moved. A thin creature with long limbs and bright eyes. It hissed when it saw the humans, but its gaze kept darting toward the dark beyond the clearing. Vale approached cautiously, his hand reaching for the latch, when a sharp crack rang out and the tree beside him split under the impact of a bolt of energy. Syndicate troops stepped from the shadows, their armor black and angular, their weapons raised. They moved with the confidence of hunters who believed they already owned their prey. Their leader's voice carried easily over the firelight. "You should have stayed in your walls, human. These cubs are ours now." Vale said nothing, his rifle already lifting, and then the clearing exploded into motion. Gunfire flashed bright against the night, the air filled with the hiss of energy bolts and the sharp cries of combat. Vale dropped behind the fire pit, returning fire in short bursts. 2 Syndicate soldiers fell, but more pressed forward, trying to push the humans back. The cage rattled as the small creature inside thrashed in panic. One of the Syndicate troops reached for it, but was cut down by a burst from Vale's rifle. Smoke stung his eyes as he scanned for a path through. Then above the chaos another sound rose, not the howl of beasts or the roar of engines, but the deep thunder of something massive moving through the trees. The ground trembled. Syndicate fire faltered as every head turned toward the dark edge of the clearing. The first shape to appear was a claw, long as a human arm, curling into the earth. Then came the eyes, burning gold. The Alpha stepped into the firelight, its fur dark and wet with rain, its gaze passing over the Syndicate soldiers as if they were already dead. For a moment no one moved. Then the Alpha lowered its head and released a sound that was neither roar nor growl, but something older, a sound that made the air vibrate in the lungs of everyone who heard it. The Syndicate broke first, scattering toward the trees, some firing wildly over their shoulders. The Alpha did not pursue. Instead it moved closer to Vale, stopping just short of the fire. The small creature in the cage went still, watching. The Alpha's gaze locked on Vale, then shifted to the jungle behind it. A faint movement in the shadows resolved into the 2 cubs, alive, unhurt, stepping forward with the strange confidence of their kind. They brushed against the Alpha's legs, but their eyes stayed fixed on the humans. Vale felt the weight of that look, as if they too were judging him. The Alpha turned away and began walking toward the deeper jungle, the cubs following close. After a few paces it paused, glancing back once as if to see if the humans would follow. Harlan's voice in the comm was tight. "Stay with them." Vale signaled his team, and they moved, keeping pace at a cautious distance. The jungle closed around them, the rain beginning to fall in steady sheets, each drop tapping against the leaves like the beat of countless small drums. The Alpha moved without sound, the cubs matching its stride, the humans struggling to keep up without revealing their position to whatever else might be watching. Hours seemed to pass in the shifting dark until the sound of rushing water reached them. They broke through a wall of vines to find a wide river cutting through the jungle, the current swift under the silver light of the moon. On the far side a cluster of lights glimmered, faint but real, structures built into the cliffs, Syndicate stronghold, their banners hanging like dark wounds against the stone. Vale realized at once what this meant. The cubs had been brought here before and would be brought again if the humans failed to end it now. The Alpha stopped at the water's edge, its gaze sweeping the far shore. Then it looked back at the humans one last time. The meaning was clear. Cross and take them back. This was the test. The Predator would not fight for them. Not this time. They had to prove they could fight for themselves. Vale stepped forward into the cold current, the water dragging at his legs, his team following, rifles held high. The rain mixed with the spray from the river, every step toward the far shore feeling heavier. In the cliffs above, Syndicate sentries moved, their weapons glinting in the light. The first shot rang out, striking the water in a burst of steam. The humans pushed forward into the storm of fire, knowing there would be no second chance. Somewhere behind them, unseen in the rain, the Alpha watched, silent and still, its eyes reflecting the lightning as the river battle began, and the outcome of the test hung on the edge of every heartbeat. The river tore at them with icy hands pulling at armor and gear threatening to drag them under, yet they kept moving each step a battle against the current and the rain that fell in silver sheets around them. Vale led the way. His eyes locked on the far shore, where the Syndicate stronghold loomed, like the bones of some ancient predator. Built into the black cliffs, lights burned in narrow slits high above, casting jagged shadows over the water, and the wind carried the faint metallic hum of machinery that never slept. Blaster fire hissed down from the cliffs, striking the river in bursts of steam. Vale raised his rifle and fired in return, the bolts cutting bright lines through the rain. His team spread out in the water, using rocks and low ridges for cover, each step forward bringing them closer to the jagged bank. The smell of scorched ozone filled the air, mixing with the sharp scent of wet stone and the taste of river grit. The first soldier reached the far shore, throwing himself against the cliff face as a volley of shots slammed into the water. Beside him, Vale followed, pulling himself onto the slick stone and pressing flat against it. Above them, the Syndicate troops moved in tight formation, firing in disciplined bursts, trying to pin the humans at the base of the cliff. A rope line was thrown and anchored, and one by one the team began to climb the wet rope, swaying with each movement, the rain making every grip a test of strength. Halfway up, Vale heard the roar of engines from somewhere behind the cliffs, deep, powerful engines, too large for the small Syndicate dropships that had been seen before. The sound rumbled through the stone, like the heartbeat of some vast machine. He realized then that the stronghold was not just a base, it was also a launch point. The enemy was preparing to take the Cubs off-world, and once they broke atmosphere, they would vanish into the black. Reaching the top, Vale rolled over the edge and into cover behind a wall of sandbags. Syndicate guards turned toward him, but his shots were already flying. One fell, another dropped to a knee, clutching a scorched shoulder. Vale's team surged over the wall, spreading through the narrow platforms that clung to the cliff face. The air was thick with shouts, the clash of metal boots, and the constant hiss of rain. Through a gap in the walls, Vale saw the inner platform of the stronghold, a wide landing pad cut into the cliff, with a single sleek ship resting at its center, its hull black and polished, its engines glowing faintly in the mist. Syndicate crews moved with frantic speed, carrying crates and gear up the ramp, and between them, under the watch of 2 armored guards, the Cubs huddled in a small cage, their eyes wide, their fur matted from the rain. Vale signaled to his team. The plan was simple: cut through the guards, take the Cubs, disable the ship. Before it could launch, they moved as one, slipping along the high walkway above the pad until they were close enough to drop down. The fight began in a blur of motion, rifles cracking, blaster fire lighting the rain in flashes of blue. The guards at the cage went down under the first wave of shots, and Vale was already moving to the latch, his fingers cold and slick, but steady as he pulled it open. The Cubs spilled into his arms, small and trembling, but alive, their tiny claws gripping his armor, as if they knew the danger. Vale held them close as the team pulled back toward the outer wall, but a sudden deep horn sounded from the ship, and the deck beneath them vibrated. The engines roared brighter. Syndicate reinforcements poured from the ramp, cutting them off from the rope line, and the only quick escape. The fight turned brutal, close-range combat, with the rain hammering down and steam rising from the hot metal of the ship. Vale's team formed a tight circle around him, the Cubs shielded in the center, each movement a push toward the edge of the platform. The Syndicate pressed hard, knowing that if they delayed the humans even a minute longer, the ship would be clear to break from the cliff and disappear into the sky. Then a shadow passed overhead, vast and silent, and the rain seemed to bend around it. Vale looked up and saw a massive shape moving through the clouds, not the Alpha, but something older, a hunter ship of a design rarely seen outside the deepest wilds, its hull carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the stormlight. It swept low over the platform, forcing the Syndicate troops to scatter under the rush of displaced air, its presence a silent warning that more eyes than the Alphas were on this fight. The brief distraction was enough. Vale's team pushed through, reaching the rope line, 2 soldiers dropping first to cover the descent. Vale handed one Cub to the next climber, then followed with the second, his boots slipping on the wet rope, the air around him alive with the hiss of blaster fire. From above, the rope swayed under the combined weight, and for a moment he thought the enemy might cut it entirely, but then his boots hit the rocky shore, and he was running for the cover of the trees. Behind them, the stronghold lit up with warning lights, and the black ship began to lift, its engines burning through the rain, the noise shaking the ground. Syndicate troops fired down into the jungle, trying to track the humans through the dense canopy, but the forest swallowed them quickly, the sound of the river and the rain masking their movement. Vale could hear the Cubs breathing against his chest, fast and shallow, but steady. They ran for hours guided by the faint beacons left earlier by the forward scouts, each marker pulling them deeper into the jungle and away from the stronghold. Above them the storm began to break, the rain thinning to a mist that hung low among the branches, shafts of moonlight spearing through in silver lines. The air smelled of wet earth, and distant smoke somewhere behind them. Engines still roared, but they were fading, the enemy losing ground. When they finally reached the ridge again, Harlan was waiting, his armor marked with mud and burns, his eyes sharp as they fell on the cubs. A brief nod passed between him and Vale. No words needed. The soldiers closed around them, forming a moving shield as they made for the outpost. But before they could descend, a bright flare lit the sky far to the east, followed by another and another. The comm officer's voice cracked with urgency. Multiple enemy craft inbound from orbit, and one large vessel matching. No syndicate profile, closing fast. The ridge trembled under a distant impact, the sound rolling through the jungle like a warning. The cubs pressed closer to Vale, their small bodies warm in the cool night air. Whatever was coming next was no longer just about saving them, it was about surviving the next hour. As the sky above filled with the lights of ships racing each other through the storm toward the same target, and the stars themselves seemed to lean closer to watch. The night sky burned with the glow of engines streaking through the clouds, the lights of ships chasing each other like hunting birds, the roar of their passage shaking the jungle trees to their roots. Vale stood on the ridge with the cubs held close there for a damp, their eyes wide as they stared upward. The soldiers around him tightened their formation, weapons raised, scanning both the sky and the tree line. Commander Harlan's voice was calm but heavy as he spoke into the comm, ordering all units to prepare for contact from multiple sides. Far above, the largest vessel descended through the clouds, its hull a dark mountain against the stars. It carried no syndicate markings, no familiar crest, only strange curved patterns that glowed faintly in the stormlight. Its shape was unlike any craft the humans had seen, sleek, yet ancient, as though it had been built for more than war. The comm crackled as the scanner officer reported an open broadcast from the ship, a voice deep and measured, speaking in words older than any known tongue. The translator hesitated, then delivered the message in a tone that felt like the weight of stone. "We have come for the air. Surrender them, and you will be spared." Harlan's eyes narrowed. His reply was sharp and cold. "Tell them the cubs are under human protection and will not be surrendered." The channel went silent after that, but the massive ship kept descending, slowing until it hung just above the jungle, its shadow stretching over the ridge. The hum of its engines resonated in the bones of every soldier, as if the air itself were warning them that their stand would be remembered. From the far edge of the ridge, movement stirred. The syndicate forces had not left. They were coming again, drawn by the same prize. Their armor caught the pale moonlight, their weapons glowing with the charge of fresh power cells. Between the syndicate troops and the soldiers, a wide open stretch of slick rock lay bare in the rain. It would be a killing ground for whoever tried to cross, and both sides knew it. The cubs pressed tighter against Vale, their small claws gripping his armor, as if they could sense the weight of what was coming. He felt the slow rhythm of their breath, and for a moment the roar of engines and the distant shouts seemed far away. But the reality of the moment crashed back as the first syndicate shot seared the air past his ears, striking the rock. With a spray of molten stone, the humans returned fire, and the battle began in full. The fight was fierce and close, the syndicate pressing hard with their numbers, the humans holding the line with discipline and grit. Every meter gained cost blood, and the rain turned the rock beneath their feet slick and treacherous. Vale moved with purpose, keeping the cubs shielded as much as his weapon arm would allow. Harlan's voice cut through the calm, calling shifts in the line, ordering heavy fire to pin the enemy. But above it all, the hum of the massive ship deepened. The vessel was lowering a ramp toward the ridge. From the ramp, figures emerged, tall and armored in the same curved designs as the ship, their movements deliberate, their weapons held low, not firing. Yet their leader stepped forward and removed a helm, revealing a face marked with ridges along the brow and eyes the color of molten copper. It spoke again, the translator, working faster this time. "Humans, the choice is yours. Give them to us and leave with your lives, or stand and be buried here." The rain streamed down its face, yet it did not blink, its gaze fixed on Harlan as if no other existed in the world. Before Harlan could answer, a new sound rolled through the air, a deep primal roar that seemed to cut through the storm itself. The Alpha emerged from the jungle below the ridge, its massive frame moving with impossible speed. The cubs twisted in Vale's arms, their voices rising in recognition. The Alpha bounded up the slope, claws biting into stone, its eyes burning with a fire that lit the air around it. When it reached the ridge, it stopped between the humans and the tall armored figures, its head low. Its teeth bared the message clear. The leader of the armored figures tilted its head, studying the Alpha, then spoke again, its voice no longer a command, but something softer, almost like respect. The heirs choose their guardian. It turned and raised one arm, signaling its warriors to withdraw. The ramp began to rise, the great ship lifting back into the clouds, its engines fading into the distance, as if it had decided that tonight was not the night to claim what it sought. The Syndicate forces saw their opportunity fading and launched one final push, desperate to take the cubs before the moment closed. But the Alpha charged with a fury that shattered their lined claws, sweeping bodies aside, teeth tearing through armor. The humans followed, pressing the attack until the last Syndicate soldier broke and fled into the rain. The ridge fell quiet except for the sound of breathing and the steady patter of water on stone. The Alpha turned to Vale and Harlan, its gaze lingering on the cubs. The smaller of the two stepped forward, brushing against Vale's arm before moving to stand beside its parent. The larger cub followed, pressing close to the Alpha's massive leg. The predator lowered its head, rumbling a sound that was almost like approval. Then, without a glance back, it began to move toward the jungle. The cubs at its side, their shapes soon swallowed by the mist and shadow. The humans stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of what had passed settling into their bones. Harlan finally spoke, his voice low. The galaxy will remember this night, and so will we. Vale glanced at the dark horizon, where the Alpha had vanished, feeling a strange pull in his chest, a knowledge that this was not the end, but only the first measure of something far greater. Days later, long after the ridge had returned to its usual stillness, an encrypted message arrived on the colony's secure channel. It carried no origin code, only a single line of text, the words clear and deliberate: "You are ready. The galaxy will remember." The message ended there, leaving only the quiet hum of the receiver and the sense that unseen eyes still watched from the dark between the stars. Far above, in the endless black, the great ship that had descended now drifted in silence, its leader standing at the viewing deck, staring at the image of the humans on the ridge. The Alpha beside them, the cubs safe. It knew the game had changed. The humans had passed the first test, and the next moves would decide the shape of the war to come. The galaxy indeed was watching, and it would not look away.